James Kaufman, World News Report today. Today is July 1st, 2022. A sighting of a giant African snail has forced Pecos County, Florida into a quarantine lockdown. Authorities took action after confirming that a notoriously destructive breed of mollusk known as the giant African land snail, they also present serious health risks to humans, as the snails carry a parasite called rat lungworm. That can cause meningitis. People are advised to wear protective gear. Wow, folks, another animal that gives meningitis to humans through something called a rat lungworm parasite. Wow.
And who is this tyrant over the human race? A snail. According to the estimates of the World Health Organization, already in our century, more than 200,000 people die annually from diseases associated with these mollusks. And now you'll learn how innocent snails do it. We have something in common with these cold, wet, sticky creatures. The unexpected, disgusting answer is right in front of you. It's a schistosome, a parasitic flatworm. The life cycle of a parasite is very complex. At one of these stages, it's adapted to live and consume reserves in the snail's body, using it as an intermediate carrier. And in the next stage, the worm enters the human body in order to complete its life cycle and provide a way to lay eggs to repeat self-reproduction over and over again. The parasite begins to literally devour human health within minutes of entering our body. After washing or bathing in contaminated water, cercariae get on the skin and begin to quickly penetrate inside. They will have no other chance to survive but to use our body for their own purposes. And so, they dissolve human skin with caustic enzymes, pierce it with a special spike on their tail, bite into everything they can, everything in order to penetrate inside us and gain access to a plentiful food supply, multiply, and ensure the survival of their kind. Schistosomes are perfectly adapted to move through the blood vessels and, using the branched network of passages, penetrate the heart, then into the lungs, and so on. They conduct reconnaissance and seize internal organs one by one until they find a secluded, quiet place. Once there, the schistosome decides to build a cozy family nest for itself. To do this, it has everything it needs: living space for laying eggs and an almost unlimited supply of food. The flow of nutritious blood will not dry out as long as the person is alive, providing a constant supply of resources that ensure a carefree life for the parasite. For the human host, problems begin from the first minutes of infection. Despite the maximum size of the parasite of 0.4 of a millimeter, within 10 minutes after infection, a person begins to experience severe itching and scabies. His skin turns red and irritated. He feels constant discomfort, but he's not able to understand the nature of the problem on his own. During the day, a skin rash appears after being gnawed by the parasite. However, after a few days, these signs will disappear, and the carrier sighs with relief. Everything seems to have gone away by itself. It was just a short-term allergy, and there's no cause for concern. But he doesn't suspect what mortal danger awaits him. After all, this was only a delay, the time needed for the parasite to change the stages of development of the larva and spread through the internal organs of its new host. The host then decides that all health problems are solved, but unwittingly only gave the schistosomes time to breathe so that they could build up a reserve of forces and find a safe place for themselves before launching the deadly attack. It starts suddenly. The toxins released by the parasite poison the body every day. As a protective measure, the human body tries to raise its temperature, but this will no longer help. At first, fever, chills, headache, and swelling of the throat and airway develop. It seems to the patient that all the Egyptian curses have fallen upon them at once. But this is only the beginning. This condition is the last warning to a person to seek urgent medical treatment. Otherwise, the schistosomes will continue their work. The parasite's eggs will drift through the body and constrict the ducts of blood, lymph, and bile. In no more than 2 months, the blood composition of an infected person will change. Sometimes the illness will seem to recede, which causes temporary relief of the patient's condition and gives them false hope. In fact, this relief is simply associated with the cycles of egg-laying by the schistosomes, and this is all just a short-term regrouping of the enemy. Soon, the war of annihilation resumes again with renewed vigor. Damage to the nervous system, confused speech, difficulties with movement and orientation in space, and finally, convulsions. I will spare you from the terrible further events, because you've already heard and seen the mortality statistics from schistosomiasis at the very beginning of my story, and you yourself can guess the final outcome. All of this looks disgusting, but there's good news for many of us. The parasite and its intermediate carriers, snails, exist in tropical regions, but in many natural habitats, almost 100% of the local population is infected with the parasite. In poor countries such as Nigeria, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, people suffer from extremely low-quality health care. Due to problems with water treatment, locals drink directly from dirty, natural reservoirs. Fortunately, snails don't live in sea and ocean water, so they cannot spread around the globe and will remain within their rivers and lakes. So some will decide that there is no danger. But perhaps one day, snails that spread the parasitic worm appear where people are not at all ready for them. Now for a surprise. It's time. French parasitologist Jérôme Boissier of the University of Perpignan, at an international conference in Montpellier, discovered the truth that shocked the scientific community. Schistosomes did the impossible. They didn't wait for the host snail to evolve and start spreading it across Europe. The parasites themselves made the first move and adapted to a new snail. They formed interspecific hybrids and thus acquired superpowers. New schistosomes, mutants, targeted local snails in Corsica as an intermediate carrier, and with great success began to parasitize in their bodies. And immediately after, they looked for a host human. Why worms need a human, you already understand. There was no shortage of bathers in the Corsican rivers. It was only when schistosomiasis was diagnosed in people who had never been to the tropics that scientists began to unwind this mystery, which is how they came to discover the infected Corsican snail. It's a pity for the inhabitants of the continents who are not adapted to the fight against schistosoma. After all, a mutated parasite can literally destroy our civilization. Even now, using the example of emerging new viruses, we see that humanity is able to successfully cope with a pandemic only if there are reserves and a small number of cases when the infection invades hundreds of thousands of organisms of the Homo sapiens species. But what if hundreds of millions or even billions of people who are not ready to fight back fall ill, when in fact we will be returned to the Stone Age and everyone must survive on their own? The answer is obvious. Medical science will respond to this new threat only in several years or decades, when there's no one left to help. In the meantime, the hope remains that modern medicine and purified water, if of course you have them, can save you. But the snail is not our only partner in facilitating the life cycle of small creatures. For example, what do you think of the tsetse fly, which carries the sleeping sickness pathogen? The symptoms were the same for everyone. At first, there were problems with walking. People lost control over their limbs. Patients couldn't rise from the floor. They could not take food on their own, control their bodily functions, nor their own emotions. As a result, everyone who got sick later died, and the locals gave it the name kuru, which means trembling. The cause of the disease remained unknown, but later it turned out the disease itself was caused by the proteins that make up each of us. Only these are far from ordinary proteins. They are completely devoid of any carriers of genetic information, that is, RNA or DNA. But despite this, they're capable of increasing the quantity of their own particles in the victim's body in a way that's unknown to science. Scientists have called these proteins prions. They're in the nervous system of all mammals, including humans. The molecules of this protein are twisted incorrectly. In their normal or alpha form, proteins are not dangerous. On the contrary, they help maintain the daily cycles of activity and rest throughout the body, and also positively affect the transmission of nerve impulses. If, at the time of the formation of the protein, there's a prion nearby with a different structure of molecules, then a dangerous beta structure can form. The body doesn't distinguish prions from ordinary proteins, so the immune system does not wage any struggle against them. Some scientists believe that dangerous prions constantly appear in our bodies, but are immediately eliminated in a biological process. Exceptions to this process lead to the fact that the growth of prions gets out of control, and then a person is doomed. Brain cells are gradually destroyed, wreaking havoc on the rest of the body. This primarily concerns the cerebellum, the part of the brain responsible for coordination. It's for this reason that the impairment of mobility appears as one of the first symptoms. Then the lesion spreads to the entire brain, and as a result, it becomes covered with and turns into something that looks like a sponge. The Four tribe was a fairly isolated population. Therefore, due to genetic degeneration, the mechanisms for the self-cleaning of cells from prions were disrupted in one of the local residents, which led to the emergence of another prion disease, variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, similar in symptoms to kuru. Cases of this fatal illness continued to occur. The fact is that the incubation period of prion disease can last up to 27 years. And after the first symptoms, the disease develops rapidly and death occurs quickly. The last person with Kuru's disease was reported in 2009. However, as it turned out, this prion disease can be picked up from eating a steak with blood, undercooked or raw meat of mammalian animals. All this is a source of infectious prions. In this case, an amount of just a few molecules is enough. Even if you boil meat several times, this doesn't guarantee safety. After all, prions can't be killed. That is, of course, if one can even call anything without a genome living. Boiling, drying, freezing, treating with alcohol and acids, ultraviolet and gamma radiation, none of these can destroy a prion. For this reason, if an animal with prion disease is detected, it's destroyed along with all the equipment used. In the case of a person, almost the same. People, of course, are not killed, but MRI machines in which patients were examined are destroyed. About 300 people die annually from manifestations of prion disease in the United States. There is no cure. In many other countries, not a single case has been recorded, but this doesn't mean that there's no disease. The fact is that many countries, such as Russia, don't want to lose money on the loss of equipment. Therefore, if patients with prions are found, they're given some other diagnosis so that there's no legitimate need to dispose of expensive equipment. It may seem that this disease appeared only in the 20th century, but in fact, it's as old as the closest competitors of Homo sapiens. Simon Underdown from Oxford Brookes University believes that prions wiped out the Neanderthals. According to Underdown's estimates, if an infectious prion were to infiltrate a proposed group of Neanderthals consisting of 15,000 individuals, it would only take 250 years to cause the extinction of the entire group. Given that the first symptoms do not appear immediately, the large brains of Neanderthals could not establish a causal relationship between the disease. However, as it turned out in 2009, some representatives of the Four tribe, who had only recently eaten the dead, had immunity to the Kuru disease. It was developed in an evolutionary way. Scientists confirmed this by implanting the resistance genes into mice. Then they infected the rodents with all kinds of prions. The animals survived after all of the trials, but most people are still very likely to be doomed to an agonizing death when the first symptoms appear. Stanley Prusiner is the man who discovered the prions and received the Nobel Prize for it. I'm sure that in the near future, humanity will be able to find an effective medicine. But until that moment, there's every chance that prion diseases might become a new plague of the 21st century, an epidemic that exterminates entire populations. This can happen, after all. Prions are evolving and may soon find new ways to infect their victims, if haven't already done so. The Cave of the Crystals has always attracted a lot of attention. Just look at these gigantic selenite crystals. After those minerals' cavities were examined under a microscope, it turned out that inside them, there are ancient microorganisms, and they've spent billions of years in their comfortable solitude. Moreover, in one of these cavities, researchers have spotted another predator previously unknown to science. But for now, they're not rushing to put it on display and promise to publish the expedition's results only in several years. And we don't know anything about all those species yet. But here's an even more intriguing discovery. American scientists believe that bacteria living at a depth of around 5 kilometers create Earth's magnetic field. The waste product that they excrete is magnetite paste, and it's the reason why our Earth's poles lie where they lie, change the magnetic field, and obtain food from any sort of garbage. Perhaps this mighty biomass will rise from the bowels and crush all the surface dwellers and find any other curious things in the depths of our planet.